All right, today we are diving deep into one of the most influential civilizations in all of human history, ancient Greece. I mean, we all know the big names, right? Socrates, Plato, Zeus, but their real story is so much more incredible. Let's get right into it.
So, here's the question we're tackling. Beyond all the myths and the famous philosophers, what was ancient Greece really like? Let's push past the Hollywood version for a minute. We're going to look at the land, the people, the wars, and the ideas that literally forged their world.
And, to really get the Greeks, you have to start with their land. The geography of Greece, it's like the master key. It unlocks everything about their culture, their politics, and even their fate.
I mean, just look at a map of Greece. It's all jagged mountains and sparkling sea. This tough terrain basically chopped the civilization up into all these isolated little valleys and islands. And the result? Greece never became one big unified country. Nope, it was more like a collection of fiercely independent city-states, or polis as they called them, that all shared a culture but were, well, pretty much always fighting with each other.
This geography, it forced them to get creative. Since traveling overland was a nightmare, the sea became their superhighway. The Greeks turned into absolute master sailors and traders. They couldn't grow everything they needed, so they shipped out what they had a ton of, like olive oil and wine, and brought back the essentials, especially grain. The sea was the glue that held their scattered world together, and trade was their absolute lifeline.
Now, when you look at their society, it was built on this really stark, fundamental divide. On one side, you had free citizens. These were the folks with legal rights, the ones who could actually participate in government. And on the other side, you had slaves, who made up about a third of the population. Now, it's really important to understand this. Slavery back then wasn't based on race like we saw in later history. Slaves were often prisoners of war, or people sold off to pay a debt. They could come from anywhere, even other Greek cities.
Okay, so let's shift gears and see how this very society gave birth to some of the most incredible intellectual achievements ever. We're talking about the world of big ideas here, the very birthplace of what we call Western thought.
And at the absolute heart of it all was this brand new invention, philosophy. The word literally means love of wisdom. For the first time in history, you had these thinkers trying to figure out the world using logic and reason, not just blaming everything on the gods or myths. They started asking these huge fundamental questions about, well, everything. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for science and critical thinking as we know it.
And this quote right here, from Socrates, man, it just perfectly captures that spirit. He truly believed that the whole point of being human was to constantly question things, to challenge your own assumptions, to examine your beliefs. It was a totally radical idea, and it was an idea that, sadly, would end up costing him his life.
This whole love of questioning was baked right into their education system. Well, at least for the sons of wealthy families. They'd study things like literature and music, but they also trained their bodies for war. The goal was to create this perfectly well-rounded citizen. For girls, though, it was a totally different story. Their education was much more limited and was almost entirely focused on how to manage a household.
And of course, you can't talk about Greek culture without talking about their art. Just think about it. The mathematical perfection of their temples, the sculptures that captured this idealized, perfect human form. They even invented drama as we know it, using these powerful tragedies to explore the deepest questions about human nature and our relationship with destiny. These ideals were so powerful, they'd echo through the centuries and inspire movements like the Renaissance.
But, and this is a huge but, this world of beautiful art and deep philosophy was also a world of constant, brutal war. The political scene was just defined by these intense rivalries, especially between the two superpowers of the day, Athens and Sparta.
On the battlefield, the Greeks perfected this absolutely terrifying formation called the phalanx. Honestly, the best way to think of it is like a human tank. It was a solid wall of soldiers, shields locked together, with a forest of deadly, long spears poking out. For hundreds of years, battles in Greece were basically decided when one of these human tanks crashed into another. It was so effective that it empowered the middle-class citizen soldier, the very person who became the political backbone of the city-state.
And the two masters of this kind of warfare, Athens and Sparta, could not have been more different. They were like night and day. Sparta was this rigid, militaristic society obsessed with land power and iron discipline, where boys started training for war at age 7. Athens, on the other hand, was a sea power. Its strength came from trade and its radical new experiment called democracy. This massive clash in values and strategy basically put them on an inevitable collision course.
Okay, so let's put all of this into a bit of a historical context. Let's do a quick flyby of the timeline to see the key periods that cover the rise, the Golden Age,
and the eventual fall of the Greek city-states.
So the story really kicks off in the Mycenaean era. That's the heroic age you read about in myths like the Trojan War. After that civilization collapsed, Greece plunged into a so-called Dark Age. Things fell apart, but it's also when the great epic poems like the Iliad were taking shape. Out of that darkness, the city-states rose up during the Archaic period. That leads us right into the famous classical period, the golden age of Socrates, the Parthenon, and, yeah, the Great Wars. And finally, you get the Hellenistic period, where Greek culture exploded across the world, right before the whole thing got swallowed up by the next big superpower, Rome.
A really key moment in that classical period was the Battle of Marathon. The massive Persian Empire invades, and somehow the tiny city-state of Athens beats them against all possible odds. This was way more than just a military win. It was a huge psychological victory. It proved that free Greek citizens could defeat the armies of a massive empire, and it became a cornerstone of Greek identity. But in the end, the Greeks' greatest enemy was themselves. The Peloponnesian War was this unbelievably brutal, 27-year-long civil war that pitted Athens against Sparta. It just dragged the entire Greek world into the mud. Sparta did eventually win, but the war left Athens totally shattered, and more importantly, it left every single city-state critically weakened and vulnerable to a new threat rising up in the north.
And that new threat? It came from Macedon, led by a guy you might have heard of, Alexander the Great. After he united the battered Greek states, he turned his army east and did the unthinkable. He conquered the entire Persian Empire. His conquests created this vast new world, and he spread Greek culture, language, and ideas everywhere from Egypt to India. We call this new era the Hellenistic Age.
And all of that brings us to our final and maybe most important point, the absolutely incredible, undying legacy that this ancient civilization left behind for all of us.
Seriously, the fingerprints of ancient Greece are all over our modern world. Our political language, words like democracy and politics, that's all Greek. The foundations of Western philosophy and science were poured by thinkers like Aristotle. The ideals of beauty in our art and architecture, our theater, even tons of words we use every single day, all of it stretches back 2,500 years to this little rocky part of the Mediterranean.
So, we'll end with this thought. The Greeks gave us these beautiful concepts like democracy and philosophy, and yet their entire society was built on the backs of slaves and was defined by constant, horrific warfare. It's a massive contradiction. So what does this complicated legacy, this incredible mix of brilliance and brutality, really teach us about the nature of human progress itself? It's definitely something we're thinking about.